Hello. The Church of Nowhere, should it exist at all, believes in free speech, very, very important, upheld by the US Constitution and by the United Nations as well. So that means that as far as this channel is concerned, the comments section will never be edited, never be censored, and no one will ever be blocked from this channel. Whether or not you block somebody in the comments section is up to you. But certainly I, as the channel content owner, I'll never block anybody at all for saying anything. And believe me, I've had another channel where people said a lot of pretty wild things to me, including threatened to kill me, of course. That was had that a couple of times. But that's okay. I think people should be allowed to vent, you know. Now, my comments area, comment section, I mean, is partly a public space, partly a private space, and of course, obviously, it's a social media space. So you have this little section here, a little section here. I love Venn diagrams. Always have fascinating logical structures they are. So that's basically it. Now, the thing about public space, I mean, let's take London, the public access, public space. Let's take London, for example, London, England, in case you don't know where London is. London, England, right? Now, the only place that actually you can express yourself, the only area you have as free speech is called Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. And everybody goes there. It's become obviously a London institution. It represents a token respect to freedom of speech. And of course, you're tucked away in a little corner with loads of other people on soapboxes, and it's a joke. Okay, it's a joke, really. Tourists go there to hear the people ranting and raving, and you're tucked away. No one can hear you. You don't matter. You're marginalised, basically. And pretty much all over London, you would have to hire a hall, a Quaker hall or town hall or whatever like that, which of course is private, a private space technically, and even a sacred space if it's a Quaker hall. So you're there by permission, and obviously you can have that permission revoked, and you can never be invited back if people don't like what you say. The people that own the private space or the sacred space don't like what you say. I'm reminded, this is a true story. I'm reminded of Theosophy Cardiff. They own this a beautiful big building in the centre of Cardiff, right? Because they're Theosophists and as rich as anything. And they got this building. Anyway, they made a very great mistake of hiring out their premises to the Ordo Templi Orientis, which was set up by Aleister Crowley. And because they're into sex magic, right, and drugs and orgies, and so the OTO, they had it up for the whole weekend, and the OTO gave them a lot of money for it as well. When the curator of the building came in on Monday morning, he was greeted to a very, very overwhelming pungent smell of hash. So it was like the smoke was thick with hash, and there were lots of sort of messes all over the carpet of various bodily fluids apparently, and other sort of unspeakables. And there was candle wax everywhere, and basically the OTO were never invited back again. And people, even they got in people to actually do magic spells to actually undo all the black magic that the OTO had done in the place, because so they had some psychics in the Theosophy Society who came in and said this place is contaminated with black magic, so they had to do all these kind of exorcisms to get rid of the influence of the OTO. So they were never invited back. Okay. So never invite the Ordo Templi Orientis to your, never hire them out, hire out your premises to them, because unless you want candle wax and bodily fluids all over the floor, and the smoke of hash billowing about the place. Anyway, perhaps they weren't the real OTO. I mean, who knows what the real OTO actually is? Nobody knows, in fact. Anyway, so that's kind of, so apart from these little sort of blops and little blips in the middle of London, private areas that you have to hire and you have to have permission to use, obviously, unless you go to some kind of, well, I mean, all the ruined stuff. I mean, all the kind of, all the broken, all the buildings that are falling down are owned by somebody as well. So you have to have permission there as well, like, you know. So apart from Speaker's Corner, there really isn't anywhere to actually express your speech. I mean, social experimentalist, Danny Shine, he has been trying for 10 years to find somewhere in London where he's allowed to express his opinions. And every time he does, some freedom-loving member of the public calls the police. And then they hassle him like crazy and ask him loads of questions they're not actually permitted to ask him. And he doesn't answer them, and then they get really, really funny with him and start saying they can arrest him on the Public Order Offences Act, which actually they can't. But of course, the police, they rely on people not knowing the law. Then they can hassle you and they can move you along and stuff like that. They say they've had complaints, but they actually haven't had any complaints. There's all sorts of stuff they can do. And basically, it's more or less the police who won't let Danny Shine have his 10 minutes of freedom of speech. I mean, as Danny Shine himself says, the only place is Speaker's Corner. That's really the only place where you're allowed to express yourself. And so then we're coming on to private spaces. I mean, one of the biggest problems he encounters is that, you have a shopping mall here, okay? I will come on to shopping mall, and then you have the shopping malls they own a bit of land around it, and then you could have a public right of way, which actually is owned by the corporation or the local authority. And now there's no demarcation line here. Okay, this line doesn't exist. So very often, if you wish to megaphone here, or sort of here, they can move you on. They can say, this is a private space, you've got to go over there. It could be like literally a meter. And that's all done just for intimidation purposes and hassle purposes. And the fact is that since there's no demarcation line between this private area outside the shopping mall and this public area, which is the walkway, or as you call it in America, or the sidewalk, there's, where are you supposed to stand? And surely, really, there's a blending of public and private areas anyway. I mean, even within the shopping mall itself, members of the public, right, are admitted to the area of the shopping mall and are encouraged to come in to buy products and services that are being sold from the shopping mall, which makes it pretty public to me. But I mean, you go in there and even without a megaphone, you start protesting, and they just have you removed straight away by security because they say this is a private space. So there's plenty of private spaces all over London and central London, in fact, cities all over the world, and plenty of arrangements where public land and private land are a very intimate, very intimate connection with each other. Let us say geographically. And there's no kind of demarcation, and they don't want a demarcation. They don't want to say this is private land because people wouldn't want to go on the private land to get to the shopping mall to buy products and services. So obviously you can't put a notice saying this is private land. It rather puts the punters off, right? So deliberately, public land and private land are sort of, they share the same space. you know. So there's plenty of that all over London, all over central London, Westminster, all of it. In fact, practically all of Westminster, Westminster is privately owned now, in one shape or form. Forecourts and shopping malls and private cafe areas and God knows what, like, you know. So these are private areas where you have, well, we have much less freedom of expression. I mean, you'd have to get permission to go there in writing from the owners of the private space, which abuts the civil space, as it were. And then, of course, you come down here the sacred space, right? And this is usually, churches and forecourts to churches. And that pretty much was going into your kind of like a private home, basically, because the sacred space, the church, the meeting house, I mean, you do have to have permission to be there. If you don't like the religion it represents, then they can ask you to leave. I mean, unless you're going to ask questions about the religion, if you're just going to stand there and say this is a silly religion, then basically they can say, well, the door's over there, mate. You know, or why are you in this forecourt outside my church saying my religion is stupid, or our religion is stupid, or God's religion is stupid? You know what I mean? Whatever you want to say. And then you come to the home space. I mean, obviously this is your private home. And if somebody starts mouthing off, you know, in your private space, in your home space, you can ask them to leave, right? So practicality comes in here. So freedom of speech sort of doesn't really apply to these areas, right? These areas are sort of tending more towards not having any freedom of speech, really, because they're privately owned. I mean, the sacred space, your home space, and the private area. These are sort of places where you can, where you can say to people, you're trespassing, you can go now, sort of thing. And this is media platform space, right? And there are all sorts of rules which you have to sign up to before you can use this social media space, because it is privately owned. So this is basically privately owned. But I mean, I think there's a grey area here between privately owned virtual space and public space, because I think that there must be a grey area. But there apparently isn't, because Alex Jones is being deplatformed, and Twitter can deplatform you, YouTube can definitely deplatform you. They have no right to do so, that's what I'm saying. Under the US Constitution, they have no right to do so, because really they are public space. I mean, they may own the servers, but in a way, I think that this is, they really do own, or rather, they don't own the content of the platform. And of course, this raises the question: is YouTube a publisher, or is it a platform? If it's a platform, then in fact it doesn't, it's not responsible for the contents that it's platforming. If it's a publisher, however, it is responsible. So I guess they want to say now that, YouTube is actually a publisher. So if we don't agree with things that are being published on our servers, then we can obviously delete the contents, and they do that obviously for copyright violations, but that's a separate story altogether. I'm talking about original content, which is somehow offensive or goes against their community rules. And the community rules, they actually are more powerful than the US Constitution. I mean, they seem to override the US Constitution. The US Constitution doesn't seem to apply to social media platforms, as indeed it doesn't seem to apply to private areas or sacred spaces or your own home, which is on the practical level probably right and proper. But where does this leave the public spaces? I mean, it really. Theoretically, what I'm saying is that the freedom of speech becomes more and more theoretical as you go from here, from your private home space, to this public space. And this public space is incredibly theoretical, really. I mean, where is this public space that you're allowed to express yourself in? It really just amounts to Speaker's Corner. That's the only public space where you have any rights at all, and that's just a sort of fun thing, a token. So basically, it seems to me that you have a theoretical public space area where you can have freedom of speech, and basically it doesn't really exist. And as you get into these places, social media platforms, private areas, sacred spaces of churches, your own private home space, then the principle of freedom of speech goes down and down and down, sort of exponentially. But in this area, where it's supposed to be highest in the places of public ownership, you don't have it there either. As Danny Shine has proved over the last 10 years, he's proved that this space, this public space, is a theoretical space where you have freedom of speech. So one does actually wonder, in the end, is freedom of speech actually a thing? Does it actually exist at all? Because, of course, the speech that you are allowed to express, of course, is very much defined by the media, by the journalists. I mean, they define the speech that you're allowed to express. And that's true of every country: North Korea, South Korea, Russia Federation. The media controls information. The media controls the speech that you're allowed to express. If you want to express your own opinions, you're not allowed to do it except through the ballot box, if you're lucky enough to be given a ballot box to express your opinions through, and that literally is it. And otherwise, there's very little space where freedom of expression actually is allowed. It seems to me that all this space, this public space, is a theoretical space. It doesn't actually exist. And freedom of speech doesn't actually exist either in the West. It's just sugar-coated. It's just tokenism is applied, to make out that we have freedom of speech, when in fact we don't have any freedom of speech at all. It's a theoretical basis because everything really is going to be privately owned. The social media is privately owned. It's a privately owned virtual space. They can kick you off anytime they want. They don't allow you freedom of expression. Private spaces don't allow you freedom of expression. Sacred spaces don't really allow you to, and your own private home. Obviously you control that, and if you don't like somebody, you can ask them to leave, right? Which is fair enough there. But when you get to social media, when you get to these private spaces, which as I say, are an intimate relationship with public spaces, then there's more and more private space in London and less public space, then that presents a huge problem. But in a way, as Danny Shine has pointed out, or was demonstrated equivocally over the last 10 years of evidence has mounted, that you don't have any freedom of speech in the streets of London either, in the public spaces. So, and people say, well, it's because of his megaphone. Well, there's two things there. The megaphone is actually manufactured to be within the law. That's number one. Number two is you expect him to stand there and shout, and he'll lose his voice and suffer from laryngitis and even throat cancer. I don't think so. He's allowed to use the megaphone. It's a safety issue. He has to have the megaphone in order to make himself heard. If he just stood there and shouted, then he would damage his vocal cords. So basically, which is what they want him to do. Either they want him to do that, or not be heard at all over the din of the traffic of London. So basically, it seems to me that we are less free than we actually think that we are. And this freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of association is actually very, very, very conditional. It's not true freedom. It's not true democracy. It's not true tolerance whatsoever. We're like North Korea, really, but they sugarcoat it so well that we don't even know that we are in North Korea, but it is exactly the same. At least North Korea is more honest about its repression of freedom of speech. At least they have a philosophy behind why you're not allowed to express your own opinions, but only reflect the party opinions. At least it's more honest, isn't it? It's the dishonesty and the hypocrisy of the West that really gets me down. It's savage, really. So anyway, you probably already know all this, but the Church of Nowhere, should it exist, does support the freedom of expression, freedom of all expression, freedom of all speech. Okay, it doesn't matter if you're a Holocaust denier, You can express those opinions as well as far as the Church of Freedom, the Church of Nowhere is concerned. Either we're free or we're not free. There can't be any tokenism. There can't be any marginalisation. There can't be any safety issues. There can't be any some kind of community rules which are designed to enhance the experience of all our users, as Facebook says. No, you can't have that. You have to have freedom, or you have to have nothing.